Long before the grandeur of the New Kingdom, before the towering monuments of Luxor and the hidden treasures of the Valley of the Kings, there was a time of uncertainty and quiet transformation, a period that history often glosses over, leaving only fragments and whispers in the archaeological record. This was the age following the collapse of the Old Kingdom, an era that modern historians sometimes dismiss as a dark age. Yet the Middle Kingdom of Egypt would rise from its shadows, leaving a legacy both mysterious and enduring. The world of this period was one of fragmented power, where once mighty pharaohs no longer ruled unchallenged and local governors. The nomarchs wielded influence over their regions with near-autonomous authority. The very land seemed to mirror this fracture, the Nile still flowing with life, but the central authority struggling to maintain the threads of unity. It was a time when the Egyptians themselves might have wondered whether their civilization would endure, a period marked by intrigue, ambition, and the subtle dance of power among those who sought control. While the Old Kingdom had built monumental pyramids to proclaim the might of the pharaohs, the succeeding years left tombs incomplete, inscriptions faded, and records inconsistent. The historical gaps are striking, suggesting that much of this era, its triumphs, failures, and secrets, was quietly lost to time, either through decay, deliberate erasure, or the shifting sands of the desert itself. Archaeologists today still find only hints of cities long abandoned, artifacts scattered and weathered, and inscriptions that tantalize more than they explain. Yet these fragments are not silent. They speak in whispers of political maneuvering, of obscure rulers whose names rarely reach the pages of mainstream history books. Some pharaohs were remembered in chronicles only briefly, their reigns recorded in dusty annals that speak more of conflict than continuity. There are hints of powerful alliances formed in secrecy, marriages that consolidated power across warring regions, and betrayals that would reshape the landscape of authority. One can almost imagine the corridors of power, shadowed halls where advisors and priests whispered counsel, where every gesture might conceal strategy, and where every decision had consequences that echoed across the Nile. But even amid uncertainty, life thrived. The people of Egypt continued to farm the fertile banks of the Nile, cultivating grains, tending livestock, and engaging in trade with their neighbors. Artistic expression, though less monumental than in previous ages, began to flourish in subtler ways. Decorated coffins, refined jewelry, and intricate pottery all suggest a society seeking beauty and meaning despite political fragmentation. Religion, too, adapted, evolving in response to both the chaos of the times and the human need to understand their place in the cosmos. Priests gained influence not only as spiritual guides, but as custodians of knowledge, safeguarding secrets that might have been lost in the turmoil of shifting rulers and contested power. The Middle Kingdom story begins here, at the intersection of decline and renewal. It is a tale of resilience, of a civilization refusing to vanish even as the structures of its old power crumbled. It is also a tale of mystery, for the period is filled with enigmatic gaps, tombs left unfinished, inscriptions partially destroyed, and rulers whose legacies seem deliberately obscured. What was lost in those years? What knowledge, what innovations, what secrets vanished with the sands that now cover the ruins? Scholars debate, theorists speculate, and yet the full truth remains just out of reach, hidden beneath layers of time, politics, and perhaps intentional concealment. In exploring this era, one must look not only at what remains, but at what is absent, for the voids themselves tell story. They speak of power struggles too complex to be fully recorded, of knowledge considered too dangerous or sacred to preserve openly, and of a society on the brink of transformation. These whispers of the past draw us into a world at once familiar and alien, a world where the Nile's eternal flow continued to sustain life even as human ambition twisted and turned in secretive patterns. The Middle Kingdom was rising slowly and deliberately, preparing to reclaim the grandeur that had once defined Egypt, yet doing so in ways that would forever cloak its story in mystery. It is within this fragile and enigmatic landscape that the narrative of the Middle Kingdom truly begins, a tale of rulers and priests, of hidden knowledge and lost cities, of art and devotion persisting against the currents of instability. To understand the Middle Kingdom is to peer into a time when Egypt's destiny hung in balance, when the ordinary and the extraordinary coexisted side by side, and when the faint echoes of history hinted at a civilization poised to rise once more, but on terms that would forever keep some of its secrets concealed. After decades of disunity and uncertainty, Egypt's fate began to shift under the steady hand of a ruler determined to restore order. Mentuhotep II, ascending to power in the troubled land of Thebes, would become the figure who stitched the torn fabric of Egypt back together, ushering in what historians now call the Middle Kingdom. His reign marked not only a political reunification, but a subtle cultural revolution, one that sought to stabilize society while embedding new ideas into the very heart of Egyptian governance. What appears in historical records as a restoration of authority was, in reality, a carefully orchestrated consolidation, full of maneuvering, alliances, and perhaps secrets never meant to be revealed. The unification itself was no simple feat. The country had fractured into competing regions, each controlled by powerful nomarchs who acted with near-sovereign independence. These local rulers commanded loyalty from their people and armies, and for decades, the balance of power had been precarious at best. Mentuhotep II's strategy combined military strength with diplomatic subtlety. Campaigns along the Nile Valley were launched not only to subdue resistance, but to build networks of loyalty that extended into previously autonomous regions. Yet behind the battles and treaties, one can imagine the quiet negotiations, the secret marriages, and the whispered promises that likely cemented Egypt's return to centralized power. But Mentuhotep II's influence extended beyond politics. He understood that to unify Egypt, he needed to unify its people spiritually, culturally, and artistically. Temples were rebuilt and expanded, not merely as sites of worship, but as instruments of cohesion, places where rituals reinforced loyalty to the pharaoh and the divine order he represented. Monumental art, previously the domain of the Old Kingdom's monumental tombs, began to convey messages of kingship, divine favor, and continuity. Reliefs depicting the pharaoh's victories were carefully designed to assert both legitimacy and moral authority, reminding the populace that the restoration of order was not only necessary, but divinely sanctioned. Within these artistic and religious frameworks, subtle changes hinted at a deeper evolution of Egyptian thought. The emphasis on Osiris, the god of death and rebirth, grew stronger, suggesting a civilization increasingly preoccupied with continuity and regeneration. Coffins and tombs from this period show a remarkable refinement in iconography, inscriptions, and funerary texts. These innovations were more than decorative. They encoded a worldview, one that combined spiritual salvation with practical governance. It was a society quietly asserting that while kingship could be disrupted, divine principles endured, guiding both ruler and subject alike. Mentuhotep II's reign also introduced a more intricate bureaucracy, a system that allowed the state to function efficiently across great distances and diverse populations. The records we uncover, administrative documents, tax registers, and legal decrees, reveal an empire learning to govern itself with unprecedented precision. Yet even these surviving fragments are tantalizingly incomplete, offering only glimpses into the machinery of power. One cannot help but wonder what strategies, plans, or alliances remain buried beneath the sands, lost to time or intentionally concealed by those who followed. Beyond governance and culture, The Middle Kingdom under Mentuhotep II saw a revival of exploration and trade, quietly connecting Egypt with its neighbors in Nubia, the Levant, and perhaps even regions farther afield. These interactions were more than economic. They were conduits for ideas, technologies, and potentially secret knowledge. Exotic materials, rare minerals, and luxury goods flowed into Egypt, enriching not just the court, but also its sacred institutions. Temples and tombs incorporated these rare items, creating objects that were at once symbols of power, devotion, and the possession of knowledge that was inaccessible to the common eye. The reunification of Egypt also created an environment ripe for intrigue and competition. The centralization of power inevitably provoked resistance from those who had thrived during the preceding period of fragmentation. Nomarchs and local elites, once independent rulers, had to navigate a new hierarchy, often leveraging influence through secret alliances, covert plots, or silent defiance. Even within the pharaoh's inner circle, power was never absolute. Advisors, priests, and military leaders each played their own roles, some supporting the king, others subtly shaping events from the shadows. The Middle Kingdom, therefore, was not only a story of political triumph, but of constant negotiation and delicate balancing acts, where one misstep could undo years of painstaking consolidation. It is in this delicate interplay of politics, religion, and culture that the Middle Kingdom begins to reveal its most fascinating mysteries. While Mentuhotep II's accomplishments are celebrated in the annals of history, the subtler truths of how he maintained control, the secret alliances that ensured stability, and the hidden knowledge encoded in temples, inscriptions, and tombs remain tantalizingly elusive. The very success of his reign depended on maintaining a veneer of divine authority while managing the human realities of ambition, jealousy, and rebellion. The rise of the Middle Kingdom, therefore, is not merely the story of a pharaoh reclaiming a fragmented land. It is the story of a civilization reinventing itself in ways both visible and hidden. Egypt was entering a new era where governance and spirituality intertwined, where art conveyed coded messages, and where the seeds of knowledge and power were carefully guarded. The lessons of this period are subtle, often hidden in plain sight, embedded in monuments, ritual practices, and administrative records that survive in fragments. It is a world that invites deeper investigation, hinting at secrets that challenge conventional narratives and beckoning those willing to read between the lines to uncover the truths of an age-long shrouded in shadow. By the end of Mentuhotep II's reign, Egypt stood as a united, prosperous, and culturally vibrant kingdom. Yet, beneath the surface, the currents of intrigue, hidden knowledge, and spiritual experimentation had already set the stage for centuries of mystery. A Middle Kingdom whose influence would echo far beyond the lifetimes of those who first shaped it. This is where the true journey begins, a voyage into a world where history, myth, and secrecy intertwine, and where every discovery raises new questions about the civilization that refused to fade into obscurity. Even as Mentuhotep II restored Egypt to a fragile unity, not all rulers of the Middle Kingdom would leave their mark in the annals of history. Many pharaohs ruled in obscurity, their reigns brief or overshadowed by successors, their names barely whispered in surviving inscriptions. Yet these forgotten rulers, often dismissed by mainstream accounts, played crucial roles in shaping the political, religious, and cultural landscape of their time. Their tombs, scattered across the sands, and the cryptic remnants of their achievements hint at a complex story that has largely been erased or obscured by centuries of reinterpretation. The pharaohs of this period were not only kings, but intermediaries between the divine and the mortal. Their authority depended on the perception of their God-given legitimacy, and any threat to that perception, whether from rival claimants, ambitious nomarchs, or even influential priests, could destabilize an entire region. It is no coincidence, then, that many rulers were later diminished in the records, their contributions quietly excised to preserve the image of continuity and divine favor. These gaps in history, far from being mere accidents, suggest deliberate acts of historical revision, hinting at political intrigue and struggles whose details remain tantalizingly beyond our reach. Among these shadowed figures, some pharaohs undertook grand projects that rivaled even the achievements of more celebrated rulers. Tombs were constructed with intricate layouts, sometimes deliberately complicated to confound potential tomb robbers or to encode religious and esoteric knowledge. Inscriptions on temple walls and mortuary chapels offer glimpses into rituals, divine encounters, and proclamations of power that have yet to be fully understood. Scholars often debate the meaning of these texts, but a closer reading reveals layers of symbolism, allegory, and perhaps secret messages intended for a select few initiated into the deeper mysteries of kingship and cosmic order. Beyond tombs and temples, these rulers exercise power through networks of loyalty and subtle diplomacy. Marriages, alliances, and even acts of calculated generosity served as tools to maintain control over regions that had once resisted central authority. It is possible that some pharaohs employed intermediaries, messengers, or secret councils to extend their influence quietly, bypassing the public rituals and monumental proclamations that are typically the focus of history. The evidence for such shadow governance may be sparse, hidden in administrative papyri, fragmented stelae, or records of local officials whose identities have been lost to time, but its existence is implied by the unusual stability or sudden shifts that occur across regions during these rulers' reigns. Many of these hidden pharaohs also engaged in spiritual experimentation, adapting religious practices in ways that hint at esoteric intentions. Certain funerary texts, previously overlooked, suggest modifications to ritual sequences or changes in how the deceased were presented to the afterlife. These innovations may have been attempts to consolidate power through religious authority, to protect the knowledge of sacred rites, or even to experiment with concepts of immortality and divine favor. The Middle Kingdom, therefore, was not only a political reconstruction, but also a laboratory of spiritual and intellectual exploration, much of which remains concealed beneath the sands. Some pharaohs' obscurity may also reflect deliberate concealment by later rulers. In a time when legitimacy was central to survival, erasing the memory of predecessors could serve to elevate a current ruler's claim to the throne. This erasure was not always complete. Fragments of names, references in tomb inscriptions, or anomalous artifacts survive, teasing modern scholars with glimpses of lives and reigns that have been partially hidden for millennia. Each fragment raises questions. Why was this ruler diminished? What knowledge or accomplishments were considered too threatening or inconvenient to preserve? What secrets might have been deliberately buried along with the pharaoh themselves? The pattern of forgotten rulers also hints at regional divisions that persisted even after reunification. Some pharaohs may have ruled primarily in Upper or Lower Egypt, exerting influence over their domains while acknowledging the nominal authority of a distant king. Others might have been powerful in religious or ceremonial capacities, their political authority secondary, but nonetheless significant in shaping societal norms and sacred practices. In each case, the legacy of these rulers is interwoven with the Middle Kingdom's broader narrative of consolidation, cultural renewal, and the careful balancing of competing powers. Artifacts, too, offer tantalizing clues. Statues, ceremonial objects, and intricately carved stelae sometimes bear names and symbols that correspond to rulers largely absent from textual histories. These objects suggest that influence extended beyond simple rule. The pharaohs left traces of thought, ideology, and even secret teachings embedded in the art and ritual life of the kingdom. Though their stories are fragmented, The surviving evidence hints at a rich tapestry of leadership and experimentation, where the lines between public image, private power, and esoteric knowledge were fluid and deliberately obscured. Ultimately, these shadowy rulers challenge the neat narratives often presented in textbooks. They remind us that history is not merely a record of who ruled when, but a dynamic interplay of power, secrecy, and survival. Their obscurity is a testament to the volatile nature of the time, and perhaps to the very real fear of revealing too much to the wrong people. In exploring their legacies, we are invited to look beyond the surface of names and dates, to read between the lines of inscriptions, to examine the subtle signals encoded in architecture, art, and ritual. In doing so, the Middle Kingdom emerges not as a static period of restoration, but as a complex era of hidden rulers, secret experiments, and political landscapes deliberately concealed from posterity. The story of these forgotten pharaohs sets the stage for the mysteries yet to come. Enigmatic tombs, cryptic inscriptions, and artifacts that resist easy interpretation. As we move forward into the heart of the Middle Kingdom, we begin to see a civilization not merely rebuilding itself, but carefully shaping a narrative that preserves some truths while concealing others. It is a story that demands patience, curiosity, and an eye for the subtle, qualities that allow us to perceive the extraordinary in the shadows of history, where the forgotten rulers of Egypt quietly continue to speak across the millennia. The Middle Kingdom's revival of Egypt was not only political and spiritual, but also architectural, leaving behind monuments that speak in whispers of ambition, innovation, and hidden meaning. Unlike the monumental pyramids of the Old Kingdom, many Middle Kingdom constructions carry a subtler, more enigmatic character. They are less imposing on the scale of size alone, yet their design and placement suggest an extraordinary depth of purpose, perhaps intended to convey messages that transcend simple royal grandeur. Temples, tombs, and pyramids of this period are steeped in symbolism, aligned not only to celestial bodies, but possibly to esoteric principles of cosmic order, reflecting a civilization deeply concerned with harmony, cycles, and the mysteries of existence. The pyramids themselves tell a complex story. Built primarily during the 11th and 12th dynasties, these structures were smaller than the colossal edifices of Giza, yet they reveal remarkable engineering ingenuity. Their core construction often employed layered stonework, internal chambers arranged with precision, and features that may have served purposes beyond mere burial. Scholars have long debated whether these pyramids contained hidden chambers, secret corridors, or even symbolic layouts designed to mirror the heavens. Some suggest that the orientation of passageways, the alignment of chambers, and the choice of materials might encode knowledge lost to later generations, a cryptic language written in stone for those capable of reading it. Temples from this period likewise carry layers of significance. Many were dedicated to deities such as Ammonius, Osiris, and Hathor, yet they exhibit features not seen in earlier constructions. Courtyards and sanctuaries were often aligned with the rising and setting sun, perhaps marking solstices or equinoxes, while columns, reliefs, and inscriptions may have served as more than decoration, instead acting as a repository for sacred knowledge. Some reliefs depict mythological narratives with subtle variations, hints of hidden doctrines, or coded instructions intended for priests and initiates. The repetition of symbols, the careful placement of statues, and even the orientation of doors suggest that these spaces were designed to guide, instruct, or protect, rather than merely to impress. Tombs, too, offer a window into the mysteries of the Middle Kingdom. The necropolises, sprawling across the Theban hills and other sites, contain chapels and burial chambers decorated with the coffin texts, a new literary form that evolved from the pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom. These texts are far more elaborate, often providing instructions for navigating the afterlife, invoking protective deities, and ensuring the safe resurrection of the deceased. Yet beyond their practical purpose, many inscriptions hint at deeper knowledge. Cryptic passages describing cosmic cycles, hidden dangers, and transformative rituals that suggest an understanding of life, death, and the universe that went far beyond the practical. Some scholars have argued that these texts reflect a systematic effort to encode knowledge in ways that only the initiated could comprehend, preserving secrets while simultaneously guiding the faithful. The artistry of the Middle Kingdom also extends to more subtle architectural choices. The use of terraces, ramps, and hidden chambers indicates a sophisticated understanding of geometry, engineering, and perhaps even acoustics. Certain spaces may have been designed to amplify chants, create echoes, or produce vibrations that enhanced ritual practices. Decorative motifs carved into walls are sometimes positioned in precise locations to catch sunlight or shadow in specific ways at certain times of the year, perhaps conveying hidden messages or performing symbolic functions. These features suggest a civilization that saw architecture as an instrument of knowledge, spirituality, and power, rather than merely as a practical or ceremonial undertaking. Yet many of these monuments survive only in fragments, eroded by time, looted, or deliberately dismantled. The incomplete state of so many pyramids and temples raises questions about the historical forces at work. Were these works abandoned due to economic constraints, political instability, or shifting religious priorities? Or were some structures intentionally left unfinished, their hidden chambers sealed, and their symbolic messages concealed from the uninitiated? The gaps in the archaeological record invite speculation, and the partial evidence hints at a sophistication that may have been deliberately obscured or lost. Even the materials used carry significance. Certain stones were quarried from distant locations, chosen not just for durability, but possibly for symbolic meaning or ritual efficacy. Some pyramids incorporated layers of differently colored stone, unusual minerals, or even metals, creating contrast that could have served practical, symbolic, or energetic purposes. These choices suggest that the builders of the Middle Kingdom were deeply intentional in every detail, embedding layers of meaning into their monuments that remain only partially understood by modern researchers. The placement of these monuments within the landscape is equally revealing. Pyramids, temples, and tombs were often situated with careful attention to rivers, hills, and the natural flow of the Nile. Their locations may have reflected not only logistical convenience or visibility, but also sacred geography, a mapping of spiritual and cosmic significance across the land. In some cases, lines drawn between monuments correspond to celestial events or astronomical patterns, hinting at a sophisticated integration of earthly and cosmic design. The evidence suggests that the Middle Kingdom's architects and planners were not merely builders, but orchestrators of a grand, multidimensional vision. What is particularly striking about these constructions is their capacity to invite wonder and reflection. Unlike the sheer scale of Giza's pyramids, which inspire awe through magnitude, the Middle Kingdom monuments engage the mind and the spirit, drawing attention to subtleties in design, alignment, and symbolism. The monuments act as a bridge between the visible and invisible, the known and the hidden, offering insights into a civilization that revered knowledge as sacred and encoded its wisdom into enduring stone. It is in these monuments that the Middle Kingdom's mysteries are most palpable. Every relief, chamber, and alignment is a puzzle piece in a larger tapestry that we are only beginning to comprehend. Their preservation, or in some cases destruction, tells us as much about the priorities and fears of those who built them as it does about the society that followed. By studying these silent witnesses, we begin to uncover not just the history of a people, but the deeper currents of thought, belief, and knowledge that defined an entire era. The Middle Kingdom's architecture, then, is more than an expression of political power or religious devotion. It is a language of secrecy and symbolism, a record of hidden knowledge, and a testament to a civilization grappling with continuity, mortality, and the mysteries of the cosmos. These monuments, even in their ruined or unfinished states, call upon us to look deeper, to question what we think we know, and to imagine the wisdom, ambition, and subtle genius of those who labored to leave their mark upon eternity. Beyond the stone and mortar of pyramids and temples, the Middle Kingdom of Egypt is perhaps most enigmatic in the knowledge it preserved through sacred texts, texts that speak of life, death, and the mysteries that lie beyond the veil. The coffin texts, developed during this period, represent a remarkable evolution from the earlier pyramid texts, opening the doorway to a new understanding of the afterlife and the cosmos. Unlike the exclusive inscriptions reserved for the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, these texts were inscribed on the coffins of nobles and officials, democratizing the spiritual journey and suggesting a profound shift in how the Egyptians conceived of death, immortality, and divine favor. These writings are not merely ritual instructions. They are encoded with layers of symbolism, allegory, and perhaps even hidden knowledge that has been lost or deliberately obscured over millennia. The coffin texts offer an intricate guide for navigating the afterlife, providing spells to ward off demons, instructions for overcoming obstacles, and invocations of deities that ensure the safe passage of the deceased. Yet embedded within these practical directions are passages that hint at a more esoteric worldview, one in which the soul's journey mirrors cosmic cycles, where the deceased becomes part of a larger, interconnected system of existence. Some passages describe celestial journeys, encounters with mysterious guardians, and transformations that transcend the physical realm. The complexity of these texts suggests that they were intended not only to comfort the living and honor the dead, but also to preserve knowledge accessible only to those trained to interpret its hidden meanings. The production of these texts required considerable skill and intention. Artisans and scribes meticulously carved or painted each spell and illustration on coffins, ensuring that every symbol, every line of hieroglyphs conveyed precise meaning. Certain symbols were repeated or stylized in ways that suggest they held secret significance, perhaps understood only by select priests or initiates. The very act of inscribing these texts may have been ritualistic, a form of magical empowerment that imbued the object with spiritual potency. In this way, the coffins became more than resting places. They were repositories of wisdom, vessels through which cosmic truths were preserved and transmitted. In addition to the coffin texts, the Middle Kingdom produced a variety of other mortuary literature, including instructional papyri and magical spells designed for both protection and empowerment. These documents hint at a civilization deeply concerned with controlling the unseen forces of the world. Spells intended to ensure safe travel in the afterlife often doubled as protective charms in the physical realm, revealing an understanding of the interconnection between life, death, and the hidden energies that surround existence. In some cases, these texts include obscure references to places, deities, and practices that vanish from the record in later centuries, suggesting knowledge deliberately preserved for select audiences or deliberately obscured from wider society. It is impossible to ignore the deliberate layering of secrecy in these texts. Some passages seem intentionally obscure, their meanings accessible only to those with specialized training or spiritual insight. This raises tantalizing questions. What was the purpose of such hidden knowledge? Were these instructions simply for the deceased, or were they a means of preserving a deeper understanding of the universe, accessible only to those deemed ready or worthy? The Middle Kingdom appears to have fostered a culture where spiritual literacy was highly valued, where the accumulation and concealment of knowledge went hand in hand, and where the boundary between practical ritual and mystical insight was intentionally blurred. Even within the surviving artifacts, one can sense an undercurrent of protection and concealment. Coffins were often placed in tombs designed with secret compartments or false doors, perhaps to safeguard the knowledge inscribed upon them. Certain hieroglyphs were stylized in ways that could encode dual meanings, allowing the text to convey both a literal message and a symbolic, hidden instruction. This duality suggests that the Middle Kingdom's scribes and priests were not only literate, but also initiated into a tradition of esoteric knowledge, an intellectual and spiritual inheritance carefully guarded from the uninitiated. The philosophical implications of these texts are profound. They indicate that the Middle Kingdom Egyptians were deeply preoccupied with understanding the cosmos, the laws of life and death, and the human role within this vast, ordered system. Concepts of regeneration, moral conduct, and the cyclical nature of existence appear repeatedly, hinting at a sophisticated worldview that integrated spiritual, ethical, and cosmological knowledge. Unlike the purely monumental expressions of kingship seen in architecture, these texts reveal a civilization seeking mastery not only over the physical world, but over the invisible forces that govern existence. Moreover, the coffin texts and related writings suggest that the Middle Kingdom may have been a time of intellectual experimentation. New ideas about the afterlife, the soul, and divine interaction emerged, reflecting both continuity with tradition and innovation in thought. Certain spells seemed to challenge conventional understanding, implying that knowledge was dynamic, evolving, and perhaps intentionally hidden to prevent misuse. This tension between revelation and concealment is a defining characteristic of the Middle Kingdom, echoing in its architecture, governance, and religious practices. The study of these texts today is like peering through a keyhole into a lost world. Each spell, each hieroglyph, each illustrative scene is a clue pointing toward a civilization that valued knowledge as both sacred and dangerous. While much has been recovered, significant portions of the Middle Kingdom's wisdom remain hidden, lost to decay, looting, or deliberate suppression over centuries. Yet even the fragments that survive speak eloquently. They tell of a society that sought to navigate the mysteries of existence, preserve secret knowledge, and guide both the living and the dead through an ordered, yet profoundly mysterious universe. In examining these sacred texts, one begins to appreciate the Middle Kingdom not only as a period of political reunification, but as an era of intellectual and spiritual sophistication. Here, the scribes and priests became custodians of knowledge, crafting writings that could survive millennia while remaining opaque, challenging, and tantalizing. They remind us that history is often only a partial story, and that the truths of the past may be hidden in plain sight, awaiting those patient and curious enough to read between the lines. The coffin texts and the sacred writings of this era are not mere artifacts. They are doorways into the hidden mind of a civilization that, while forgotten in part, continues to whisper its secrets across time. The Middle Kingdom did not exist in isolation. While the Nile's fertile banks provided sustenance and civilization thrived along its length, Egypt's borders were constantly in dialogue with neighbors, some friendly, others mysterious, and some barely recorded in history. To the south lay Nubia, a land rich in gold, exotic animals, and skilled warriors. Trade with Nubia brought not only wealth, but also ideas, technologies, and cultural practices that influenced Egyptian society. The corridors of power in Thebes and Memphis were well aware of the value of these interactions, and rulers often sent envoys, tributes, or even military expeditions to maintain favorable relations. Yet these interactions were never entirely transparent. Much of what passed between the kingdoms may have been secret, conducted away from the eyes of the public, leaving only tantalizing hints in inscriptions and fragmentary records. To the northeast, The Levant was a region of both opportunity and danger. Cities along the coast and inland trade routes offered access to timber, copper, and other valuable resources. Yet they were also home to competing powers whose ambitions sometimes conflicted with those of Egypt. Evidence from this period hints at covert diplomacy, alliances sealed through marriage or ritual, and possibly even clandestine operations to protect Egyptian interests. The records are frustratingly incomplete, but the artifacts and occasional inscriptions suggest a sophisticated network of communication and influence, carefully managed by the pharaohs and their advisors. These networks may have enabled Egypt to extend its influence far beyond its borders, ensuring access to resources and knowledge that were vital for the kingdom's stability and prosperity. The Sea Peoples and other less documented groups also loom in the shadow of the Middle Kingdom. Though their full impact is better recorded in later periods, hints of migratory movements, raids, or distant contacts appear in scattered inscriptions and archaeological finds. The Egyptians may have encountered these groups in ways that are still poorly understood, yet the potential for secret alliances or conflicts adds another layer of intrigue. Some scholars speculate that Egypt's political and military strategies during this time were informed by intelligence and reconnaissance that remain hidden to us, encoded in accounts that were never meant for posterity or deliberately obscured by later historians. Trade and exchange were not only material but cultural. Artifacts recovered from the period show influences from Nubia, the Levant, and even regions farther afield, suggesting the movement of ideas, motifs, and possibly technologies. Ceramics, jewelry, and ceremonial objects reveal a fusion of styles, hinting at a complex interplay of diplomacy, commerce, and cultural adaptation. Certain objects, particularly those found in elite tombs, suggest that some knowledge, skills, or religious practices may have been intentionally transmitted through these exchanges, creating hidden channels of information that shaped Egypt's spiritual and political life. These exchanges were selective and controlled, pointing to a deliberate strategy of knowledge preservation and dissemination. The military campaigns of the Middle Kingdom also reflect the kingdom's engagement with its neighbors. Expeditions south into Nubia were not merely for conquest or tribute collection. They served to secure trade routes, establish fortified settlements, and maintain influence over key territories. In the north and northeast, campaigns against rebellious city-states or competing powers may have involved covert operations, espionage, and strategies designed to assert control without provoking full-scale conflict. While monumental inscriptions celebrate victories and tribute, they rarely convey the full complexity of these encounters. Behind the public narrative, there may have been secret negotiations, hidden alliances, and covert manipulation that ensured Egypt's dominance, while keeping many details concealed from both subjects and rivals. Beyond politics and economics, these interactions with neighbors may have introduced Egypt to esoteric or technological knowledge that has largely been forgotten. Certain artifacts suggest techniques or symbolic practices not native to Egypt, possibly transmitted through trade or clandestine channels. Whether these were methods of metalworking, architectural knowledge, or spiritual rituals, the selective incorporation of foreign practices into Egyptian culture indicates a sophisticated awareness of value and secrecy. Knowledge was not shared indiscriminately. It was a currency, carefully guarded, tested, and integrated in ways that reinforced the kingdom's power and spiritual authority. The Middle Kingdom's relationships with its neighbors were therefore both overt and hidden, public and secretive. While diplomacy and trade were essential to survival, much of what occurred behind the scenes is tantalizingly obscure. It is possible that envoys carried messages or objects whose true significance was known only to the pharaoh and a select few priests or advisors. Certain alliances may have been maintained not through open treaties, but through ritualized exchanges, symbolic gestures, or even coded communications embedded in the art and architecture of the time. These secret layers of interaction contributed to Egypt's stability, enabling the kingdom to thrive in an often unpredictable geopolitical environment. Even in the archaeological record, the traces of these hidden networks persist, if subtly. Imported objects found in tombs, inscriptions mentioning distant rulers, and stylistic anomalies in art suggest connections that go beyond what mainstream history acknowledges. Scholars are left to piece together these fragmented clues, attempting to reconstruct the invisible web of influence, trade, and secret knowledge that shaped the Middle Kingdom. Each discovery raises new questions. What technologies or ideas were adopted in secrecy? How did these relationships influence the spiritual and political evolution of Egypt? What knowledge was deemed too sensitive to record openly, and who controlled access to it? In considering Egypt's interactions with its neighbors during the Middle Kingdom, it becomes clear that this era was not a simple period of internal consolidation. It was a time of careful observation, strategic engagement, and selective secrecy, in which power extended beyond borders and knowledge became a form of currency as valuable as gold or grain. The kingdom's ability to navigate these relationships with subtlety and foresight reveals a sophistication that is easy to overlook when focusing solely on monuments or surviving texts. In fact, much of the kingdom's enduring strength may have come precisely from the hidden networks, covert alliances, and carefully guarded knowledge that allowed Egypt to maintain dominance without exposing its full hand to friend or foe. The Middle Kingdom's neighbors were thus not merely peripheral actors. They were integral to the story of Egypt's rise and stability. Trade, diplomacy, conflict, and clandestine knowledge all intersected to shape the kingdom in ways both visible and hidden. Understanding these relationships is essential to grasping the true nature of the Middle Kingdom, revealing a civilization that thrived not only through internal order, but through its capacity to engage with the world around it in a manner that was strategic, subtle, and profoundly intelligent. While the monuments above ground reveal much about the Middle Kingdom's rulers and their society, an even deeper layer of mystery lies hidden beneath the desert sands and the bustling cities that dotted the Nile Valley. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of urban centers, some fully abandoned, others partially preserved, whose true purpose and scale suggest a civilization far more intricate than previously understood. These cities were not mere administrative hubs. They were living networks of power, trade, and ritual, connected through roads, canals, and possibly even secret tunnels that remain largely unexplored. The Middle Kingdom's urban planning hints at a deliberate integration of practical infrastructure with spiritual symbolism, suggesting that even the layout of these cities was designed to reflect cosmic order, societal hierarchy, and perhaps hidden knowledge known only to the elite. Among these hidden networks were underground chambers and passageways whose function has long puzzled historians. Some tunnels appear to connect royal tombs to distant temples. Others may have served as storage for sacred texts or ritual implements. There are indications that these subterranean spaces were designed for secrecy and security, protecting treasures, archives, and ceremonial artifacts from both looters and the uninitiated. In certain instances, these tunnels seem intentionally complex, incorporating false doors, concealed chambers, and labyrinthine passages that suggest the builders sought not only to hide, but also to test those who might enter. The very act of navigating these hidden networks may have been a ritual in itself, a symbolic journey mirroring the spiritual voyage of the soul through the afterlife. The urban centers of the Middle Kingdom also reveal evidence of specialized districts where crafts, trade, and religious practice were carefully segregated and organized. Certain neighborhoods appear dedicated to scribes, artisans, or priests, each contributing to the functioning of the city while also participating in networks of secret knowledge. Pottery, inscriptions, and minor artifacts indicate that certain skills, techniques, or sacred knowledge may have been passed selectively, reinforcing hierarchies and ensuring that key information remained under the control of those deemed worthy. The flow of knowledge and resources within these cities was as much a matter of social and spiritual order as it was of practical necessity. Archaeological evidence suggests that some Middle Kingdom settlements were fortified not only against human threats, but possibly to guard esoteric knowledge. Temples within these cities often contain hidden chambers or restricted areas where sacred texts, relics, or ceremonial objects were stored away from the public eye. The inscriptions and reliefs within these chambers sometimes display iconography that is rare or unique, hinting at teachings or doctrines not intended for widespread understanding. In this way, the cities themselves functioned as living repositories, where the architecture, layout, and spatial design reinforced both practical governance and the controlled dissemination of knowledge. Even roads and pathways within and between cities were not purely functional. Certain alignments, pathways, and intersections may have been designed with symbolic or ritual significance in mind. Temples, administrative buildings, and elite residences were often positioned to create lines of sight or processional routes that amplified ceremonial activities or conveyed subtle messages about power, hierarchy, and spiritual order. These designs suggest a civilization that considered both the physical and metaphysical dimensions of urban planning, embedding meaning into structures and spaces that would guide both inhabitants and visitors, knowingly or unknowingly, through a complex system of influence and observation. Subterranean networks may also have had spiritual or ritual functions. Some chambers appear designed for meditation, initiation, or other ceremonial practices, where acoustics, light, and spatial design contributed to transformative experiences. Certain reliefs and inscriptions suggest that these hidden areas were considered thresholds between the mundane and the divine, allowing access to sacred knowledge that was unavailable to the uninitiated. This integration of the secret and the spiritual reflects a sophisticated understanding of both psychology and symbolism, implying that the Middle Kingdom's architects and planners were concerned not only with survival and governance, but with shaping human perception, consciousness, and devotion. Evidence from tombs and necropolises further complements the understanding of these hidden urban networks. Certain tombs are positioned at the periphery of cities, while others are located in isolated regions connected by seemingly inconspicuous pathways. The spatial relationships between tombs, temples, and cities hint at a deliberate attempt to create layered systems of secrecy, protection, and ritual connectivity. These layouts may have been intended to preserve knowledge, safeguard treasures, or guide the spiritual journey of the deceased in ways that mirrored the physical experience of the living city. In this sense, the Middle Kingdom's urban centers were not merely places of habitation. They were dynamic, living maps of power, knowledge, and spiritual architecture. Artifacts recovered from these urban and subterranean networks also suggest a rich tapestry of ritual and esoteric practice. Objects such as ceremonial vessels, amulets, and carved inscriptions indicate that hidden knowledge was transmitted in both material and symbolic forms. Certain artifacts appear in multiple locations across different cities, hinting at a network of interconnected knowledge that may have been coordinated at a national or even spiritual level. The meticulous care in the design, production, and placement of these objects suggests that they were more than decorative. They were instruments for preserving, transmitting, and controlling knowledge, accessible only to those initiated into their meaning. The Middle Kingdom's hidden cities and underground networks, therefore, represent an extraordinary fusion of practical engineering, political strategy, and spiritual sophistication. They reveal a civilization capable of integrating complex systems of governance, ritual, and knowledge management in ways that modern observers are only beginning to appreciate. These networks were not accidental. They were carefully planned and maintained, reflecting an awareness of both the visible and hidden forces that shaped life death, and legacy. To explore these cities is to glimpse a civilization obsessed with the interplay between secrecy and revelation. Above ground, monuments proclaim power and divine favor. Below ground, hidden networks preserve wisdom, ritual, and knowledge beyond the reach of the ordinary observer. The Middle Kingdom, through its urban and subterranean architecture, teaches that true understanding requires looking beyond the obvious, reading between the lines of inscriptions, and tracing the invisible threads that connect places, objects, and ideas. It is a civilization that valued hidden complexity as much as public grandeur, creating a layered world where power, knowledge, and spirituality coexisted in a delicate, carefully orchestrated balance. In these hidden chambers, along secret corridors, and within abandoned neighborhoods, the Middle Kingdom's secrets endure, whispering to those patient and perceptive enough to listen. The cities and networks of this period are more than ruins. They are living testaments to a civilization that understood that the most profound truths are often the ones carefully concealed, preserved not for immediate consumption, but for the initiated, the curious, and those who seek to uncover what lies beneath the surface of history itself. Beyond the monuments and cities of the Middle Kingdom, there exists a realm of knowledge that bridges the terrestrial and the celestial, a domain where prophecy, cosmic alignment, and astronomical observation shape the spiritual and political life of Egypt. The pharaohs and priests of this period were not merely rulers and religious leaders. They were observers of the heavens, interpreters of celestial patterns, and custodians of knowledge that connected the movements of stars and planets to the fates of kings, cities, and civilizations. The skies were not merely a backdrop for daily life. They were an active, living map, a language of signs and omens that could guide decisions, warn of threats, and reveal hidden truths. Astronomy in the Middle Kingdom was sophisticated, deeply integrated into architecture, ritual, and statecraft. Temples and pyramids were often aligned with specific stars, solstices, and equinoxes, suggesting that their builders were guided by more than practical considerations. Certain chambers were oriented so that sunlight would penetrate in precise ways during key celestial events, illuminating reliefs, inscriptions, or sacred objects. These alignments were not accidental. They appear to encode knowledge of cosmic cycles, reinforcing the idea that the movement of the heavens was intimately linked to the divine authority of the pharaoh. Such precision hints at a sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and even temporal prediction that challenges modern assumptions about the period's scientific capabilities. Prophetic traditions also emerge from this time, often intertwined with celestial observation. Some inscriptions suggest that rulers and priests interpreted the movements of stars, planets, and lunar cycles as omens, portents, or messages from the divine. Certain texts describe visions of future events, warnings of upheaval, or indications of blessings and misfortune tied to specific astronomical configurations. These prophecies were carefully preserved, often embedded in temple inscriptions, ritual texts, or sacred objects, and they appear to have been accessible only to the initiated. The exact methods by which these predictions were made remain mysterious, but their presence reflects a civilization that perceived a direct connection between cosmic events and the fate of human affairs. The notion of cosmic order, or Ma'at, was central to Egyptian thought, and during the Middle Kingdom, it became even more intertwined with celestial observation. Ma'at represented balance, truth, and justice, and rulers were responsible for maintaining harmony both on earth and in accordance with the heavens. Aligning temples, tombs, and cities with celestial patterns was not merely symbolic. It was a practical expression of the pharaoh's duty to uphold cosmic order. By observing the skies and interpreting their messages, priests and rulers could enact decisions, conduct rituals, and guide the kingdom in ways that mirrored universal balance. In this sense, prophecy, astronomy, and governance were inseparable, creating a system in which knowledge of the heavens was a tool of both spiritual and temporal power. Some Middle Kingdom texts suggest a fascination with cycles far longer than a single human lifetime, hinting at an awareness of cosmic rhythms and historical patterns. Certain references to celestial alignments coincide with myths of creation, regeneration, and the eternal return, suggesting that rulers and priests may have been attempting to anchor their actions within an understanding of time that extended beyond the immediate. These ideas resonate in the placement of temples, the orientation of tombs, and the timing of festivals, which were often synchronized with celestial events. The sky, in this context, functioned as both a calendar and a prophetic guide, encoding knowledge that could influence strategy, ritual, and statecraft. The integration of prophecy and celestial observation also played a role in legitimizing power. Pharaohs could present themselves as divinely favored, their authority sanctioned not only by tradition and ritual, but by the alignment of stars and planets. A favorable omen might reinforce a ruler's claim, while celestial warnings could justify political or military action. Priests, as interpreters of these cosmic messages, gained influence not only in spiritual matters, but in the practical governance of the kingdom. This dual authority, combining sacred insight and earthly administration, underscores the subtle yet profound power of esoteric knowledge in shaping the Middle Kingdom's political landscape. Artifacts from this period further suggest the careful preservation and transmission of celestial knowledge. Certain carved stele, reliefs, and ritual objects depict star charts, constellations, or symbolic representations of planetary cycles. Some scholars argue that these depictions were more than artistic embellishments. They encoded practical astronomical information, ritual instructions, or even predictive formulas. The repetition of patterns and the precision of placement imply that this knowledge was highly valued, controlled, and passed down selectively, accessible only to those trained to decode its meanings. In this way, the cosmos itself became a repository of hidden wisdom, intertwined with the spiritual and political life of Egypt. The prophetic and astronomical traditions of the Middle Kingdom also reveal an element of secrecy. Much of this knowledge may have been deliberately concealed from the broader population, accessible only to a priestly elite. Temples, tombs, and ritual chambers often incorporated hidden inscriptions, concealed chambers, or coded texts, suggesting that the interpretation of cosmic signs was a carefully guarded art. The very act of observing and understanding the heavens was both a privilege and a responsibility, reserved for those deemed capable of using this knowledge wisely. This secrecy ensured that the power derived from prophecy and celestial insight remained centralized, reinforcing both spiritual and temporal authority. Finally, the interplay of prophecy, astronomy, and secret knowledge points to a civilization deeply aware of its place within the universe. The Middle Kingdom was not simply concerned with survival, expansion, or monumental achievement. It was a culture striving to harmonize human existence with cosmic order, to encode knowledge that could guide rulers and priests across generations, and to preserve mysteries that transcended time. These practices reveal a worldview in which the heavens and the earth are interconnected, where hidden knowledge shapes destiny, and where the Middle Kingdom's enduring legacy is as much intellectual and spiritual as it is architectural and political. The study of these celestial and prophetic traditions allows us to glimpse the sophisticated mind of a civilization attuned to both visible and invisible forces. It suggests that the Middle Kingdom's power extended beyond armies and monuments, residing also in the careful observation of the universe, the interpretation of omens, and the preservation of esoteric knowledge that guided both rulers and priests. In contemplating the skies, we begin to understand a society that saw beyond the immediacy of life on Earth, seeking to align itself with patterns of cosmic significance and to safeguard truths that continue to fascinate and intrigue millennia later. As the sun cast its golden rays across the vast Nile, the people of the Middle Kingdom looked not only to the fertile waters for sustenance, but also to the heavens for guidance, seeing in a movement of stars and planets the hidden rhythms of existence itself. The scribes and priests, guardians of sacred knowledge, meticulously recorded celestial events, eclipses, and the rise and fall of constellations, embedding these observations within texts that have survived only in fragments. These were not mere calendars for agricultural purposes. They were coded messages, prophetic in nature, carrying warnings and insights meant for those who understood the language of the cosmos. In these texts, the future was not simply a linear unfolding of days, but a cycle, repeating patterns that could reveal the rise and fall of kings, the coming of droughts or floods, and even the destiny of nations. Among these fragments, the coffin texts and pyramid inscriptions contain passages that speak of omens, the appearance of strange celestial phenomena, sudden storms that break the calm of the Nile, or the migration of birds in unusual formations. While mainstream interpretations often dismiss these as ritualistic or metaphorical, closer scrutiny suggests a deeper purpose. Each omen, each cryptic phrase, may have been a deliberate attempt to encode knowledge of the natural and spiritual worlds, a secret calendar understood only by those initiated into the inner mysteries of the kingdom. Some scholars have proposed that the priests of the Middle Kingdom were observing long cycles of the sun and moon, perhaps even tracking planetary alignments, and using these to foresee events that could shape the destiny of Egypt itself. The language of prophecy in the Middle Kingdom is intricate, often woven in poetic metaphor, yet it carries a precision that hints at more than artistic expression. References to the eye that watches the horizon or the serpent crossing the sky are likely symbolic depictions of celestial events, comets, eclipses, or rare alignments. These signs were interpreted as messages from the gods, a cosmic code that the pharaohs and priests could read to guide their decisions. There is evidence that certain temples were aligned not merely for ceremonial grandeur, but for astronomical observation, their halls and obelisks positioned to capture the light of specific stars during key moments in the year. This alignment between architecture, ritual, and prophecy suggests a civilization that understood the heavens in ways that continue to elude modern science. Even more fascinating are the texts that hint at a cyclical understanding of time, a concept far more sophisticated than a simple linear chronology. The Egyptians of the Middle Kingdom seem to recognize patterns repeating over centuries, perhaps even millennia, suggesting that the rise and fall of civilizations were not random, but part of a greater cosmic rhythm. Some modern researchers have speculated that these patterns were used to predict social unrest, famine, or the emergence of new leaders. The notion that the priests could read the stars to foresee such events challenges conventional historical narratives, implying a sophisticated system of knowledge lost or deliberately hidden over the centuries. Among the most intriguing examples are the so-called famine stela and references to prophetic texts now housed in museums around the world. These inscriptions describe periods of scarcity, celestial omens, and the role of divine favor in determining the survival of the people. Some passages hint at rituals performed not merely to appease the gods, but to align human action with cosmic events, a synchronization of earthly governance and celestial order. The repeated insistence on timing, on performing rites at the exact moment the heavens dictate, suggests a profound awareness that every event, from the rise of the Nile to the crowning of a pharaoh, was part of a larger, interconnected cycle. The Middle Kingdom's fascination with prophecy extended beyond natural events into matters of destiny and the afterlife. Texts reveal an intricate interplay between celestial phenomena and human fate, suggesting that knowledge of the heavens could grant insight into life, death, and what lies beyond. Some passages describe visions of kings guided by the stars, or the righteous following paths foretold by celestial signs. This intertwining of astrology, spirituality, and political authority created a system in which those who understood the stars held not only religious influence, but the potential to shape history itself. Yet, much of this knowledge seems to have been deliberately obscured. Over time, as dynasties rose and fell, the exact meaning of many prophetic texts was lost, simplified, or hidden from public view. Modern archaeologists uncover fragments, but without the context of initiation and the oral teachings of the priests, much of the significance remains enigmatic. This deliberate veiling suggests that prophecy in the Middle Kingdom was both a tool of governance and a safeguard, a repository of wisdom meant only for those deemed worthy, a secret thread linking the heavens to the Nile, the stars to the people, and the past to the future. In contemplating these messages from antiquity, one begins to see the Middle Kingdom not as a mere bridge between dynasties, but as a civilization deeply attuned to the rhythms of the cosmos. The scribes and priests were not only recorders of events, but interpreters of celestial code, mapping human destiny against the backdrop of the infinite night sky. It is a vision that challenges the linear, fragmented histories we are taught, and invites us to imagine a world where the stars themselves spoke, where omens were carefully observed, and where prophecy was a living, guiding force in the life of a civilization. In this quiet interplay of light and shadow, of stars and stone, the Middle Kingdom whispers across millennia, offering glimpses of a knowledge so profound that it still resonates in the imagination of those who seek to listen. And as the night falls once more over the Nile, the mysteries of prophecy linger in the air, a reminder that the ancients saw far more than we can yet understand, and that some secrets, encoded in the heavens and the earth alike, await rediscovery. The sands of Egypt are filled with stories both told and untold, whispers of monuments that rise majestically and tombs that vanish into the desert, their secrets buried beneath layers of earth and time. During the Middle Kingdom, the quest for eternal life and the preservation of knowledge manifested not only in grand temples and pyramids, but also in hidden chambers, secret tombs, and enigmatic structures that remain largely unexplored to this day. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments, yet countless sites mentioned in ancient texts have either disappeared or were deliberately concealed, leaving only shadows of what once existed. There is a sense that these hidden tombs were designed not merely as resting places for the dead, but as repositories of wisdom, containing sacred texts, ritual implements, and artifacts imbued with power meant to endure beyond the reach of ordinary eyes. Some of the most fascinating mysteries arise when examining the pyramids and mortuary complexes of the Middle Kingdom. Unlike the earlier Old Kingdom pyramids, which are grand in scale and dominated by external spectacle, the pyramids of the Middle Kingdom often contain labyrinthine corridors, false passages, and chambers whose purpose remains uncertain. Many of these structures appear designed to confuse, to guard their contents from tomb robbers. Yet the precision and intentionality suggest a deeper meaning. Scholars have long debated whether these hidden spaces served purely protective functions or whether they encoded esoteric knowledge, aligning with celestial bodies, sacred numerology, or ritual practices that modern observers cannot fully grasp. In some cases, entire pyramids were left unfinished or altered mid-construction, hinting at political or religious shifts, or perhaps the deliberate redirection of sacred knowledge to secret locations. The Middle Kingdom was a period of consolidation and control, and it is plausible that certain tombs or chambers were intentionally erased from collective memory, reserved for initiates of the priesthood or the ruling elite. There are tantalizing references in later texts to lost tombs of the wise and hidden sanctuaries beneath the sands, which may correlate with these deliberately obscured sites. The very notion that entire monuments could disappear, erased by time, sand, or deliberate human intervention, underscores a civilization deeply conscious of the power of secrecy. Archaeological discoveries in the Nile Delta and Upper Egypt reveal tombs that defy conventional understanding. Some contain elaborate wall reliefs that speak in cryptic language, with symbols and motifs not found elsewhere. Others are void of decoration entirely, yet contain objects whose purpose is mysterious. Small statues, intricately carved boxes, and ceremonial tools whose function cannot be deduced from surviving records. Certain corridors are aligned with remarkable precision to capture sunlight during solstices or equinoxes, while others are oriented to the movement of specific stars, suggesting that the hidden tombs themselves were celestial instruments, designed to connect the dead or the artifacts within with cosmic cycles. Legends surrounding these lost structures persist, passed down in fragmentary form in later dynasties and even in folk tales. Travelers, priests, and local communities spoke of tombs whose entrances vanished after construction, leaving behind nothing but sand dunes and subtle depressions on the desert floor. Some tombs were said to contain chambers filled with texts that predated the Middle Kingdom itself, suggesting that the ancients were not only preserving their contemporary knowledge, but were also safeguarding wisdom from previous eras. The idea that knowledge could be deliberately hidden, only to be discovered by a select few, speaks to a mindset that viewed information as sacred and potentially dangerous in the wrong hands. Even today, the desert holds its secrets tightly. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery have revealed anomalies suggesting structures buried beneath the sands, yet excavation is fraught with difficulty, cost, and danger. Some archaeologists speculate that certain sites may never be fully explored, either because their locations were intentionally obfuscated or because they were deliberately constructed to resist discovery. There are also theories that tombs were deliberately built in alignment with subterranean features, including rivers or geological formations, implying that their design was not only spiritual but also tied to the physical and energetic landscape of Egypt itself. One cannot ignore the role of symbolism in these hidden tombs. Reliefs, inscriptions, and artifacts often carry layers of meaning that remain partially incomprehensible to modern eyes. Birds, serpents, stars, and abstract geometric designs recur across multiple sites, suggesting a language or code known to the initiates of the Middle Kingdom priesthood. These symbols may have conveyed esoteric knowledge regarding cosmology, sacred rites, or metaphysical laws governing life, death, and the afterlife. The very act of hiding such tombs indicates that the preservation of wisdom was considered as important as the preservation of kingship itself. The elite understood that physical monuments could be plundered, but encoded knowledge, hidden within architecture, symbols, and secret chambers, could endure indefinitely. Stories of rediscovery add another layer of intrigue. Some hidden tombs were uncovered centuries later, often revealing objects that seem anachronistic or mysterious in their construction. In certain instances, tombs contained items that suggested technological knowledge or artistic mastery that surpasses what mainstream historians attribute to the Middle Kingdom. These discoveries fuel speculation that much of Egypt's past, particularly its understanding of the cosmos, spiritual law, and even material science, remains inaccessible, buried beneath sands, and secrets intentionally left for future generations to uncover. The allure of hidden tombs and lost pyramids is not merely archaeological. It is profoundly human. They evoke a sense of mystery and wonder, of a civilization that balanced the ephemeral with the eternal, of kings and priests who understood that some knowledge is too powerful, too sacred, to be left in the open. Each lost tomb is a silent testament to the Middle Kingdom's sophistication, its mastery over stone and symbolism, and its awareness that what is concealed can often carry greater power than what is revealed. In the soft, shifting sands of Egypt, the past continues to speak in whispers, calling those who are willing to listen. suggesting that even after thousands of years, the secrets of the Middle Kingdom are far from fully revealed. In this interplay of earth and sky, sand and stone, the hidden tombs of the Middle Kingdom stand as monuments not only to the dead but to knowledge itself, a knowledge that was guarded jealously, encoded in walls, corridors, and objects, waiting for the right eyes to see, the right mind to understand, and the right time to reveal the truths long buried beneath the endless desert. In the hushed corridors of Middle Kingdom tombs, the whispers of eternity echo not only through the stone walls, but also through the sacred texts left behind, speaking of life, death, and what lies beyond. Unlike the Old Kingdom, where pyramid texts served largely as royal decrees for the afterlife, the Middle Kingdom introduced the coffin texts, a democratization of spiritual knowledge, extending guidance and protection not only to kings but also to nobles and scribes. These texts were written with a precision and poetic elegance that concealed layers of meaning, offering instructions for navigating the perilous journey of the soul and for invoking the favor of gods, whose presence permeated both the mortal world and the invisible realms. Each hieroglyph, each incantation, was carefully chosen, forming a map not merely of death but of transcendence, a guide to moving between worlds with awareness and purpose. The Middle Kingdom's approach to the afterlife reflects a profound evolution in Egyptian thought. Where earlier civilizations had emphasized monumental grandeur as a pathway to eternity, here there was an intimate, almost secretive focus on the soul itself, its trials, its protections, and the knowledge it must carry. Funerary texts were accompanied by symbolic amulets, ritual objects, and precise arrangements of the body and tomb, each designed to ensure that the soul could overcome the obstacles of the duat, the shadowy underworld where chaos and judgment awaited. Some scholars have suggested that these instructions were not merely spiritual allegories, but encoded wisdom, a synthesis of cosmology, ethics, and metaphysics, accessible only to those initiated into the deeper mysteries of the kingdom. It is within this context that the Middle Kingdom appears to have embraced a dual understanding of death, both as a natural transition and as a deliberate journey requiring knowledge and preparation. The texts speak of the soul encountering serpents, gates, and guardians, each representing forces or trials to be recognized and navigated with intelligence and ritual precision. The power of these texts lay in their ability to transform fear into mastery, to equip the living with insight into the unseen, and to guide the departed through realms invisible yet profoundly structured. The notion that death could be mastered through knowledge hints at a society deeply invested in the preservation of wisdom, aware that physical monuments could decay, but spiritual comprehension might endure forever. In some tombs, particularly those of the nobility and high-ranking officials, inscriptions go further, suggesting that certain secrets of the afterlife were reserved for a select few, perhaps those with access to secret teachings passed down through the priesthood. These passages, sometimes cryptic, sometimes illustrated with unusual symbols, suggest an esoteric dimension to Egyptian spirituality. The hieroglyphs are not always literal. They serve as keys, connecting the material world with metaphysical principles, and hinting that the afterlife was less a place and more a state of alignment. An understanding that one's actions, thoughts, and knowledge in life shape the soul's trajectory after death. Artifacts found within these tombs reinforce this notion. Figurines of gods, protective amulets, and objects shaped like birds, eyes, or serpents are often arranged in deliberate patterns, corresponding to instructions in the coffin texts. Some scholars propose that these objects functioned as conduits or amplifiers, channeling spiritual energy and guiding the soul along predetermined pathways. Others have noted that the arrangement of tomb chambers, the orientation of entrances, and even the placement of false doors may have been designed to interact with cosmic forces, aligning with stars, solstices, and equinoxes to ensure the deceased's successful passage. The Middle Kingdom's understanding of the afterlife was thus not only theological, but geometrical, astronomical, and profoundly ritualistic, blending science, art, and mysticism into a cohesive system of eternal navigation. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Middle Kingdom doctrine is the interplay between secrecy and accessibility. While coffin texts were more widely available than Old Kingdom pyramid texts, many passages were intentionally obscure, filled with double meanings, or encoded in symbolic language. Initiates may have been instructed orally in ways that the uninitiated could not comprehend, ensuring that sacred knowledge remained protected. This selective transmission underscores a recurring theme in the Middle Kingdom, that knowledge is power, and that the mysteries of life and death are entrusted only to those deemed worthy, those prepared to wield understanding responsibly. The Middle Kingdom's approach to death also reflects its political and social realities. In an era of reunification after centuries of fragmentation, the careful codification of funerary practices served not only spiritual purposes but also social cohesion. By standardizing aspects of burial and ritual, while retaining esoteric teachings for a select few, the kingdom reinforced the authority of its priests and elites, embedding power into the very structure of belief. The rituals and texts were thus simultaneously protective, instructive, and political, a complex web that intertwined survival in both the mortal and spiritual realms. As one contemplates these texts and the tombs that house them, a sense of reverence emerges. The Middle Kingdom did not merely fear death. It engaged with it, studied it, and attempted to master it through knowledge and ritual. In doing so, it left behind a legacy that challenges modern understanding of life and mortality. These hidden doctrines, carefully inscribed and ritually enacted, remind us that for the Egyptians, death was never final. It was a journey, a passage shaped by wisdom, guided by the stars, and secured through secrets that continue to inspire awe and speculation today. The coffin texts, the objects, the chambers, and the tombs collectively offer a glimpse into a civilization that regarded the soul as an instrument of cosmic resonance, a participant in the eternal cycles of life and death. It is a vision of the Middle Kingdom as a society that combined meticulous knowledge with spiritual insight, where human destiny was intertwined with divine order, and where the mastery of death was an endeavor worthy of kings, priests, and the select initiates who held the keys to eternity. Even after millennia, the messages endure, silent yet powerful, inviting the curious to listen and reminding us that the greatest mysteries often lie in the spaces between life and the eternal beyond. The corridors of power in the Middle Kingdom were rarely as visible as the stone walls of temples or the grandeur of pyramids. Behind the ceremonial facade of kingship lay a world of shadowed influence, a network of courtiers, priests, and advisors whose actions often determined the fate of the realm more than the proclamations of the pharaoh himself. The history we read in textbooks is orderly, neat, and simplified. It tells us of kings who rose, conquered, and died. Yet closer examination of records, inscriptions, and fragmentary papyri reveals a far murkier reality, one of hidden alliances, political intrigue, and secret councils where the fate of knowledge, wealth, and power was decided away from public view. Mentuhotep II's reunification of Egypt, so celebrated in conventional accounts, may have been as much a product of strategy and cunning behind the scenes as of military triumph. Some scholars suggest that certain key figures in the court were not merely advisors, but custodians of secret wisdom, texts, prophecies, and knowledge passed down from earlier dynasties. They gave them leverage over both kings and people. These hidden councils, meeting in the shadows of the palaces or in secluded temple chambers, likely deliberated not only on politics, but on the preservation of sacred knowledge, deciding which texts and artifacts would remain accessible and which would vanish into secrecy. Assassinations, sudden deaths, and mysterious disappearances recorded in fragmentary sources hint at the precarious nature of power in this era. The Middle Kingdom, though outwardly a time of stability and cultural flourishing, was undergirded by a delicate balance of influence. Priests, scribes, and even royal family members wielded authority in subtle ways, often invisible to the populace. Their motivations were complex. Some sought spiritual preservation, others political dominance, and many, perhaps, were driven by the understanding that knowledge itself was the ultimate currency. Control over information could elevate a minor official to unprecedented authority or doom a rival to obscurity. The interplay of secrecy and governance in the Middle Kingdom extended into religious life as well. Temples were not merely centers of worship. They were centers of administration, espionage, and knowledge management. Certain temples are believed to have served as archives for documents too sensitive for ordinary circulation, including records of foreign relations, astronomical observations, and even coded instructions for rituals whose full meaning was accessible only to initiates. It is likely that some political decisions were informed not solely by earthly counsel, but by interpretations of sacred texts, omens, and prophecies, insights that the common populace could not grasp. In this way, hidden knowledge directly shaped policy and succession, blending the spiritual and temporal realms into a single, powerful force. One of the most compelling mysteries of this period involves the apparent suppression or deliberate alteration of historical records. Kings who fell from favor might have their monuments defaced or their achievements minimized in official inscriptions. Certain high-ranking officials are known to have vanished from public records entirely, their existence acknowledged only in fragmented documents or obscure references. Could these disappearances have been motivated by rivalries over esoteric knowledge, rather than mere politics? Some evidence suggests so. The deliberate erasure of individuals and the selective recording of events imply a conscious effort to shape collective memory, ensuring that only the narratives favorable to those in control of hidden knowledge endured. It is also plausible that secret societies or inner councils existed within the Middle Kingdom's political and religious framework, operating beyond the reach of conventional authority. Initiates of these groups would have had access to knowledge of astronomy, ritual, and metaphysical principles, which could have been used strategically in political decisions. Kings themselves, despite their apparent omnipotence, may have been guided or constrained by advisors who held secrets too powerful to reveal to the public. In this light, the apparent stability of the Middle Kingdom conceals a dynamic world of subtle power struggles, where influence was wielded as skillfully through silence and secrecy as through force or decree. The corridors of these secret councils were likely populated not only by humans, but by symbols and objects of authority whose meaning has been lost to time. Certain amulets, ritual implements, or coded texts may have functioned as keys to influence or evidence of legitimacy, signaling to insiders who held authority and who was subordinate. These artifacts, carefully controlled and rarely seen by outsiders, provided a tangible manifestation of hidden power, creating a layered system of governance in which the visible trappings of kingship masked a far more complex reality. Even the succession of pharaohs during the Middle Kingdom raises questions that standard histories cannot fully answer. Dynastic continuity was often fragile, and yet the kingdom endured. Was this the result of careful planning, alliances forged in secrecy, and the stewardship of hidden knowledge? Certain records hint at conspiracies to remove rivals, manipulations of lineage claims, and orchestrated marriages, all suggesting a political environment where mastery of information was as important as mastery of armies. Knowledge itself became a weapon, wielded to secure the throne, control religious authority, and dictate the flow of Egypt's cultural and spiritual legacy. In contemplating these hidden political intricacies, one begins to see the Middle Kingdom not merely as a period of reunification and cultural revival, but as a civilization where secrecy, wisdom, and power were intertwined at the highest levels. Behind every grand temple, every public decree, and every monumental pyramid, there was an unseen world operating in shadows, guiding decisions that shaped history in ways the public could not witness. The more one studies the Middle Kingdom, the clearer it becomes that the past we read is only a fragment of a far richer tapestry, woven from both what was revealed and what was deliberately concealed. Ultimately, the hidden political intrigues of the Middle Kingdom remind us that history is rarely straightforward. Power, knowledge, and survival were inseparable, and the decisions made in secret, whether in temple chambers, hidden archives, or private councils, shaped not only the fate of kings but the destiny of Egypt itself. The shadows of these ancient machinations persist today, glimpsed in the fragments of texts, the anomalies of tombs, and the subtle alignment of monuments, hinting at a sophisticated civilization where the greatest battles were not fought with swords but with secrets. Amid the shifting sands and silent monuments of the Middle Kingdom, countless artifacts lie waiting, their significance often veiled in symbolism and secrecy. These objects, crafted with precision and purpose, were more than mere tools or ceremonial items. They were vessels of power, carriers of knowledge, and perhaps even keys to understanding the mysteries that the ancient Egyptians sought to guard so jealously. From finely carved statues to intricately inscribed amulets, each artifact seems to whisper fragments of a story that eludes modern understanding, hinting at technologies, spiritual practices, and cosmological insights far beyond what conventional history credits to this era. Among these treasures, statues of pharaohs and deities stand as silent witnesses to the Middle Kingdom's sophisticated grasp of form, symbolism, and narrative. Their features were not merely artistic representations, but encoded messages intended to convey authority, divine favor, and sometimes hidden knowledge to those trained to read their signs. Eyes carved with meticulous attention, gestures frozen in stone, and proportions guided by sacred geometry all suggest a dual purpose: to inspire reverence in the uninitiated and to transmit layered meanings to those who understood the deeper codes. Some researchers have argued that the alignment of certain statues within temples, their orientation toward the rising sun, or their proximity to other sacred objects may have served as a means to channel or amplify spiritual or cosmic energy, a concept that merges art, ritual, and metaphysics into a single, cohesive system. Amulets and ritual implements, often overlooked in favor of monumental architecture, reveal another dimension of Middle Kingdom sophistication. Small objects, carved from faience, stone, or precious metals, were meticulously arranged in tombs, on the bodies of the deceased, or within temple sanctuaries. Birds, eyes, serpents, and geometric patterns recur in these artifacts, often forming a visual language that may have conveyed instructions, protections, or pathways for the soul. In some instances, amulets appear to correspond to celestial alignments, suggesting that the Egyptians were using objects not only for ritualistic purposes, but as instruments in a broader system connecting the earthly and the cosmic. These small, intricate artifacts offer tantalizing evidence that knowledge in the Middle Kingdom was encoded at multiple levels, accessible to the general populace in symbolic form, yet understood in depth only by initiates. Even the more mundane objects, such as ceremonial vessels, scepters, and writing implements, carry a significance that goes beyond their immediate function. Inscribed hieroglyphs, subtle motifs, and the choice of material all appear deliberate, conveying a hierarchy of meaning that intertwines political authority, spiritual protection, and the transmission of knowledge. Certain vessels, for instance, are found exclusively in high-ranking tombs or temple sanctuaries, suggesting that they serve as tools for rites known only to a select few. Others bear inscriptions that have puzzled scholars for centuries, hinting at metaphysical principles or advanced knowledge of the natural world, now obscured by time and the loss of interpretive context. Among the most enigmatic are objects whose design seems to defy explanation. Intricately carved boxes whose purpose is unclear, statues with features that do not correspond to known artistic conventions, and tools whose function remains speculative. Some of these items may have been used in rituals aimed at aligning human activity with cosmic cycles, or in initiatory practices designed to unlock hidden wisdom. Others may have been deliberately placed in tombs or temples as symbols of authority or as safeguards for knowledge too dangerous or sacred to be left unprotected. Across all these artifacts, there is a consistent sense that they were not created for casual use, but were part of a highly controlled system of knowledge transmission, one in which form, placement, and symbolism were all critical. The possibility that some artifacts contain technological knowledge or secrets of natural law cannot be dismissed. Certain objects hint at an understanding of mathematics, astronomy, or mechanics that modern scholars struggle to fully explain. For example, precise measurements, proportional alignments, and recurring geometric patterns suggest that some artifacts were more than decorative. They may have been tools for teaching, observation, or ritual practice that integrated scientific and spiritual principles. These items offer a glimpse into a Middle Kingdom civilization that approached reality as a web of interconnected forces, where mastery over the material world was inseparable from mastery over cosmic and spiritual realms. Legends and fragmentary records hint at the idea that some artifacts were intentionally hidden or dispersed to preserve secrecy. Knowledge in the hands of the wrong person was considered dangerous, and objects carrying this knowledge were carefully controlled, their meaning veiled behind layers of symbolism or stored in inaccessible locations. Some artifacts that have been rediscovered in modern times appear as if they were deliberately placed to avoid detection, suggesting a culture profoundly aware of the fragility of knowledge and its potential misuse. The artifacts themselves, in essence, became guardians of wisdom, ensuring that the insights of the Middle Kingdom survived only for those who could interpret them correctly. Even today, the study of these objects continues to yield surprises. New discoveries, often small and overlooked, challenge assumptions about the Middle Kingdom's capabilities and worldview. Whether through inscriptions that suggest advanced understanding of the cosmos, intricate craftsmanship that defies conventional timelines, or symbolic networks that connect multiple artifacts across regions, these objects reveal a civilization deeply invested in the preservation and transmission of knowledge. They hint at secrets of power, spirituality, and science, a tantalizing suggestion that the Middle Kingdom's achievements may extend far beyond what conventional history recognizes. In the quiet contemplation of these artifacts, one gains a sense of the Middle Kingdom as a civilization obsessed with balance, between the visible and the hidden, the material and the spiritual, the mundane and the cosmic. Each object, from the grand statue to the smallest amulet, represents a thread in a vast tapestry of knowledge, carefully interwoven to guide, protect, and teach. The artifacts are silent, yet they speak across millennia, inviting those who listen to glimpse a world in which wisdom was both sacred and practical, and where the preservation of knowledge was a task as monumental as the construction of a pyramid. In this way, the artifacts of the Middle Kingdom stand as more than relics of the past. They are keys to understanding a civilization that sought to harmonize human endeavor with the rhythms of the cosmos, to encode wisdom within material form, and to ensure that the secrets of power, the mysteries of the stars, and the journey of the soul would endure far beyond the passage of time. The history of the Middle Kingdom, as presented in textbooks, is neat, orderly, and often sanitized. Pharaohs are celebrated, temples are admired, and dynasties are described as linear progressions from chaos to unity. Yet beneath this polished narrative lies a layer of complexity that has been deliberately minimized, obscured, or altogether suppressed. Archaeological reports, fragmentary papyri, and ancient inscriptions hint at a far more intricate reality, one in which knowledge, power, and truth were tightly controlled, often hidden from the eyes of common citizens and even from later generations of scribes. This suppression raises profound questions. What was deliberately omitted from public memory, and why? There are examples of texts that have been partially destroyed, edited, or relocated, leaving gaps in the historical record that are difficult to explain by simple decay or accident. Certain kings vanish from chronicles without explanation, their monuments dismantled or repurposed, while others are glorified beyond reason. Some scholars argue that this selective preservation reflects political motives, the desire to shape public perception, or the suppression of knowledge considered dangerous or destabilizing. In this context, suppression was not merely about erasing scandal or rebellion. It was about controlling the narrative of wisdom itself, preserving some truths while hiding others in inaccessible archives or within the walls of secret chambers. Even archaeological findings support the idea that much of the Middle Kingdom's history was deliberately obscured. Tombs and pyramids were frequently altered after construction, with corridors blocked, inscriptions replaced, and artifacts removed. Temples were expanded, realigned, or repurposed, sometimes erasing evidence of earlier rituals or deities. This physical manipulation of sacred spaces suggests a conscious effort to maintain secrecy and control, to decide who could access knowledge, and to protect certain information from the uninitiated. Objects and monuments were not only symbols of power, but also instruments of control, their meaning accessible only to those initiated into esoteric traditions or privileged with the right knowledge. The suppression of history extended into intellectual realms as well. Certain texts, particularly those with references to advanced astronomy, metaphysics, or esoteric rituals, were carefully guarded by priesthoods. Many of these documents have been lost entirely or survive only in fragmented form, leaving modern scholars to speculate about their full content. Codified wisdom was sometimes embedded in cryptic symbols, hieroglyphic anomalies, or ritualized forms that could only be properly interpreted by those trained in secret knowledge. This deliberate opacity ensured that sacred information could survive over millennia, protected from misuse or misunderstanding, yet it also contributed to the enigmatic reputation of the Middle Kingdom that persists today. The erasure or concealment of knowledge also reflects social and political dynamics. Kings and priests recognized that information was a form of power, one that could challenge authority if misused. By controlling access to sacred texts, astronomical observations, or prophetic inscriptions, they maintained a hierarchy of knowledge that reinforced social order. Those outside the inner circle, scribes, officials, and certainly common citizens, were only permitted partial understanding, receiving the visible, ritualized forms of culture while the deeper truths remained hidden. In this way, suppression served both spiritual and political purposes. It protected the integrity of sacred knowledge while consolidating control in the hands of a few. Some suppressed histories may have been deliberately encoded in ways that would only be recoverable under specific circumstances, using architectural alignments, symbolic objects, or layered texts. Temples and tombs, for example, sometimes contain inscriptions that appear ordinary at first glance, but reveal deeper patterns when aligned with celestial phenomena, astronomical events, or ritual calendars. This method of concealment ensured that knowledge could survive without being fully accessible, creating a system in which truth could endure but only be revealed to those capable of understanding it. The Middle Kingdom, it seems, recognized that the preservation of wisdom required both physical and intellectual safeguards. Modern archaeology occasionally brushes against this hidden layer, uncovering fragments of texts, anomalous artifacts, or tombs whose purpose defies conventional interpretation. These discoveries provoke both wonder and frustration. They hint at a wealth of knowledge once preserved but now partially lost, teasing the imagination with glimpses of wisdom that may never be fully recovered. In many cases, the more we uncover, the more it becomes apparent that what we see is only the surface of a far deeper, deliberately obscured reality. Suppressed histories create gaps that invite speculation, encouraging a view of the Middle Kingdom not as a simple chronological sequence, but as a civilization operating on multiple levels simultaneously: the visible, the ritualized, and the hidden. The suppression of history also shapes our understanding of Egypt's influence on subsequent civilizations. By controlling which aspects of knowledge were recorded or transmitted, the architects of secrecy may have influenced the development of later empires, ensuring that certain wisdom survived in altered forms while other truths were concealed. This selective preservation may explain the recurring motifs, architectural principles, and symbolic systems that appear across Mediterranean and Near Eastern cultures, hinting at the subtle endurance of Middle Kingdom ideas despite deliberate attempts to obscure them. In contemplating these suppressed histories, one begins to appreciate the Middle Kingdom not only for its achievements, but also for its sophisticated understanding of secrecy, knowledge management, and the power of narrative. The civilization knew that information could shape reality, and it exercised meticulous care in determining who could access it. Temples, tombs, and artifacts were instruments of concealment as much as they were of revelation, ensuring that knowledge, once preserved, would endure even if hidden from many. What survives today, fragments, anomalies, and enigmatic artifacts, offers tantalizing glimpses of a past far richer and more complex than textbooks admit, reminding us that history is often written not by the entirety of truth, but by the careful curation of what is allowed to remain visible. The suppressed histories of the Middle Kingdom invite us to reconsider our assumptions about civilization, authority, and knowledge itself. They challenge the notion that what we see is all that exists and suggest that beneath the monuments, texts, and artifacts lies a hidden web of wisdom, carefully protected across generations. It is in the shadows of this suppressed knowledge that the true brilliance of the Middle Kingdom emerges, a civilization that mastered not only stone and architecture, but the very art of safeguarding truth, preserving it for those patient and perceptive enough to seek it out millennia later. The echoes of the Middle Kingdom did not fade with the sands of time. They reverberated through subsequent civilizations, leaving traces of wisdom, ritual, and artistry that suggest a far-reaching influence extending beyond the borders of Egypt. As the kingdom consolidated power along the Nile, the knowledge preserved within its temples, tombs, and hidden chambers appears to have traveled with traders, diplomats, and priests, subtly seeding ideas in distant lands. From the Mediterranean coastlines to the islands of the Aegean, evidence emerges of cultural resonance. Architectural motifs, symbolic designs, and religious practices bearing striking similarities to those of the Middle Kingdom, yet refracted through local customs and interpretations. These echoes suggest that Egypt's reach was not only political or economic, but deeply intellectual and spiritual, hinting at a network of transmission whose subtlety eludes straightforward historical accounting. Trade networks of the time were not merely conduits for grain, gold, or luxury goods. They were avenues for the flow of ideas, ritual knowledge, and symbolic motifs. Artifacts originating from Middle Kingdom workshops appear in distant lands, often adapted and transformed, yet retaining traces of their original meaning. A statuette discovered on a distant shore may carry the precise geometrical proportions and symbolic gestures of its Egyptian prototype, while inscriptions in foreign languages echo the metaphysical concepts encoded in hieroglyphs. These objects acted as vessels for knowledge, carrying hidden wisdom across borders, embedding fragments of Egyptian cosmology, ritual practice, and political ideology in the cultural fabric of other civilizations. The Middle Kingdom's influence, therefore, cannot be measured merely by conquest or diplomacy. It is found in subtle patterns of exchange, the quiet permeation of ideas, and the transmission of knowledge veiled in art and symbolism. Even religious systems appear to bear the imprint of the Middle Kingdom. Certain motifs, the veneration of the divine ruler, the symbolic use of serpents, the centrality of cosmic cycles, resonate in distant temples and ceremonial practices far removed from Egypt itself. While mainstream historians often attribute these similarities to coincidence or cultural diffusion, a closer examination reveals intentional transmission, whether through the movement of priests, scribes, or objects carrying encoded knowledge. The spiritual and esoteric principles that governed Egyptian rituals may have served as templates or points of inspiration, subtly shaping how other cultures perceive divinity, order, and the cosmos. In this sense, the Middle Kingdom's hidden doctrines survived not only within Egypt's borders, but as an invisible thread woven through the consciousness of civilizations yet to rise. Prophetic and astronomical knowledge, meticulously preserved in the Middle Kingdom, may have also influenced distant cultures in ways that are difficult to trace but impossible to ignore. Observations of the stars, alignments of monuments, and symbolic codifications of celestial events appear in later civilizations with uncanny similarity, suggesting that some knowledge of cosmic rhythms, cycles, and omens traveled across seas and generations. These patterns hint at an ancient understanding of time and destiny, encoded in the alignment of temples and tombs, and later adapted by cultures seeking guidance, legitimacy, or insight from the heavens. The Middle Kingdom may thus have served as a repository and transmitter of celestial wisdom, leaving subtle fingerprints on the development of astrology, ritual calendars, and cosmological frameworks in far-off lands. Yet the Middle Kingdom's influence was not purely intellectual or spiritual. It was also practical, manifesting in technology, craftsmanship, and statecraft. Architectural techniques, artistic conventions, and engineering principles spread outward, often disguised as local innovation but rooted in Egyptian tradition. Temples and monumental buildings constructed in later civilizations bear geometric similarities to Middle Kingdom prototypes, while certain symbolic motifs and construction methods recur across regions and eras. These echoes suggest that artisans and builders carried knowledge from Egypt, adapting it to local contexts while preserving underlying principles. Knowledge of construction, proportion, and sacred alignment was therefore transmitted not only through texts or ritual, but through practical, hands-on teaching, encoded in the very fabric of material culture. The endurance of Middle Kingdom influence can also be seen in the literary and symbolic traditions of later societies. Myths, stories, and allegories often mirror Egyptian cosmology, referencing dualities of light and dark, life and death, order and chaos, in ways that suggest a shared intellectual heritage. Symbols that originated in Egyptian ritual, serpents, eyes, stars, and cosmic geometries, reappear in foreign contexts, often in highly stylized or veiled forms, preserving fragments of meaning that would have been understood by those with insight into the original traditions. These recurring motifs form a subtle web of continuity, an invisible lineage of thoughts stretching across centuries and continents, bridging cultures that otherwise appear disconnected. What is particularly striking is the possibility that some knowledge of hidden rituals, metaphysical principles, and sacred geometry survived deliberately outside of Egypt, ensuring continuity even as political and social upheaval threatened its preservation at home. The Middle Kingdom may have recognized that wisdom too profound for general understanding could endure more safely in distant lands, carried by trusted emissaries or encoded in portable artifacts. In this way, the civilization's influence was both a safeguard and a seed, transmitting knowledge in ways that were indirect, cryptic, and resistant to the erosion of time. Even today, traces of this influence provoke fascination and speculation. Archaeologists and historians uncover anomalies, artifacts, symbols, and architectural patterns that defy easy explanation, hinting at a hidden continuity that bridges the Middle Kingdom with the broader currents of Mediterranean and Near Eastern history. The subtle persistence of Egyptian knowledge challenges assumptions about linear development and cultural isolation, suggesting instead a network of exchange, adaptation, and transmission that underscores the sophistication and foresight of Middle Kingdom planners, priests, and artisans. In reflecting on these echoes, one begins to appreciate the Middle Kingdom not merely as a historical period defined by dynasties and monuments, but as a civilization whose wisdom rippled outward across time and space. Its influence shaped the evolution of art, ritual, architecture, and thought far beyond the Nile, embedding fragments of knowledge and mystery in distant lands. The Middle Kingdom emerges as a silent architect of intellectual and spiritual currents, its legacy preserved not only in surviving texts and monuments, but in the enduring patterns of culture, belief, and symbolism that continue to resonate across the ancient world. As the final rays of sunlight fade over the Nile, one begins to see the Middle Kingdom not merely as a chronological chapter in history, but as a living, breathing network of knowledge, mystery, and influence, whose echoes reach far beyond the borders of Egypt and the span of centuries. The civilization that flourished along the fertile banks of the river mastered more than stone, irrigation, and political organization. It mastered the art of preserving secrets, encoding wisdom, and guiding the unseen currents of power and belief. The monuments, tombs, artifacts, and texts that survive are fragments of a far grander vision, an intricate tapestry woven from ritual, observation, and intellect, designed to endure long after kings and commoners alike had passed from the world. This civilization understood that knowledge is power, and that the true measure of influence lies not merely in conquest or control of territory, but in the ability to shape thought, culture, and destiny across generations. The pyramids, temples, and hidden chambers were more than expressions of wealth and authority. They were instruments of continuity, ensuring that wisdom could survive the decay of time, the turmoil of politics, and the fading memory of the masses. Each monument, whether visible in grandeur or concealed in shadow, carried within it codes, cosmic, mathematical, and symbolic, that preserve the Middle Kingdom's insights into life, death, and the cycles of existence. The hidden tombs, labyrinthine corridors, and secret chambers reveal a civilization acutely aware of the fragility of truth. Knowledge of celestial cycles, sacred geometry, ritual practice, and the afterlife was carefully guarded, transmitted only to those deemed worthy, and deliberately veiled from the uninitiated. The coffin texts, with their intricate instructions for navigating the afterlife, and the artifacts scattered across tombs and temples, serve as reminders that the Egyptians of the Middle Kingdom viewed existence as a web of interconnections between the mortal, spiritual, and cosmic realms. They understood that the preservation of wisdom required strategy, secrecy, and careful stewardship, and they acted accordingly, ensuring that their civilization's deepest insights could survive even the most turbulent eras. Political intrigue, suppressed histories, and hidden councils further underscore the Middle Kingdom's sophistication. Beyond the public ceremonies and visible rule of kings, there existed layers of power carefully controlled by priests, scribes, and trusted advisors. Decisions were influenced not only by human ambition, but by knowledge of omens, prophecies, and the cycles of the heavens. The deliberate concealment of certain texts, the manipulation of historical records, and the calculated erasure of rivals suggest that those who wielded knowledge could shape history itself, subtly guiding the kingdom along paths determined as much by wisdom as by circumstance. In this way, the Middle Kingdom emerges not only as a society of monumental achievements, but as a civilization deeply conscious of the interplay between secrecy, power, and survival. The artifacts of the Middle Kingdom reinforce this vision. From intricately carved statues to enigmatic amulets and ritual implements, each object carries layered meaning, functioning simultaneously as a tool, a symbol, and a repository of knowledge. Their arrangement in tombs, temples, and sacred spaces was deliberate, aligning with celestial events, ritual calendars, and cosmological principles. These objects were not created for mere display. They were instruments of continuity, designed to transmit wisdom to those capable of understanding it and to safeguard it from misuse. In studying them, one glimpses a civilization that approached knowledge as sacred, recognizing that the smallest object might carry the greatest significance. Perhaps most striking is the Middle Kingdom's enduring influence beyond Egypt. Through trade, diplomacy, and the movement of people, ideas, and objects, the wisdom of this civilization seeped into distant lands, leaving traces in art, architecture, ritual, and symbolic systems. Elements of Egyptian cosmology, spiritual practice, and political philosophy appear, subtly transformed, in Mediterranean, Aegean, and Near Eastern cultures, suggesting a transmission of knowledge that defies simple historical explanation. This influence, often invisible to conventional scholarship, demonstrates that the Middle Kingdom's legacy was not confined to the Nile Valley, but extended across geography and time, shaping thought and culture in ways that continue to resonate. The suppression of history, the concealment of sacred texts, and the carefully guarded corridors of knowledge underscore a profound principle. The preservation of wisdom requires both protection and discretion. What the public could see, the grandeur of temples, the splendor of tombs, the authority of kings, was only one layer of reality. Beneath this surface lay the true treasure, insight into the universe, mastery over cycles of life and death, and strategies for safeguarding power and knowledge. The Middle Kingdom demonstrates that civilizations can endure not only through monuments and armies, but through the careful cultivation of memory, secrecy, and the transmission of truth across generations. In reflecting on the Middle Kingdom, one realizes that it was not merely a period of kings and monuments, but a civilization profoundly attuned to the rhythms of existence. The interplay of life and death, the cycles of the heavens, and the careful orchestration of knowledge and ritual reveal a society that sought to harmonize human action with cosmic order. In every hidden chamber, every preserved artifact, and every fragment of sacred text, there is evidence of a civilization that understood the enduring power of wisdom and the delicate responsibility of those who hold it. As night falls once more over the Nile, the Middle Kingdom continues to speak if one knows how to listen. Its voice is subtle, layered in shadow and light, embedded in stone, hieroglyph, and artifact. It whispers of kings and priests, of hidden tombs and secret rituals, of celestial alignments and coded wisdom. It reminds us that history is never merely what is recorded in texts or preserved in museums. It is also what is hidden, what survives in fragments, and what waits patiently beneath the sands for discovery. The Middle Kingdom, in its complexity and subtlety, embodies this duality, offering glimpses of truth while guarding its deepest mysteries. And so, the legacy of the Middle Kingdom is not only in what was built, written, or inscribed, but in the invisible threads it wove across time and space. Knowledge preserved in secrecy, influence spread across distant lands, and wisdom encoded in ways that continue to intrigue, inspire, and challenge us today. It is a civilization that reminds us that the past is never fully known, that truth is often layered and hidden, and that the pursuit of understanding requires patience, insight, and a willingness to peer into the shadows. In the end, the Middle Kingdom leaves us with a sense of wonder, a quiet reverence, and the persistent knowledge that some secrets are timeless, enduring in the sands, in the stars, and in the subtle resonance of human history itself.